Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the webinar of Generation Reclamation, reclaiming the past to build a strong future for Māori, for Aotearoa. Proudly hosted by Global Women, I'm Karleen Everitt, the moderator of this webinar. We will begin with a whakamoemitsi and mihi. The translation of this will appear in the chat for you to see. So I invite you all now to sit back and enjoy the wāhine taumata kōrero, tēnā koutou katoa. A korori honore haru kia ihoa ngā mano, ko te mato te tamata wairua tapu me ngā anihira pone te manga ke rota i tautoko mai, aini akini ai. Ana ko tēnei anō tamatu inu atu ki a koe ihoa, ho mai tō koutou aroha no me o tini manaakitanga ki a mātou. Me o mātou whānau, me te rōpū Global Women, a ko te manga ke rota i tautoko mai, aini akini ai. E honore nōku, a ki te mihi atu ki a koutou o kutuakana, a te toko whānei o ngā wahine, te wahine taumata kōrero, marunga i te ipurangi nei. A tēnā koutou, ngā mema o Global Women, me te tūmaki o Global Women e te tuakana e Agnes, me tō tari, me ngā mema o te pāri, tēnā koutou katoa. He mihi katuka ki te mihi atu ki tā mātou Papa Wally Few. E takoto mai ana i roto i tō mātou whare tūpuna o tūmatauenga ki runga i tō mātou marae o Otiria. Aue te aroha, aue te tangi. Rātou te unga mate kia rātou. Tātou ngā kānohi ora kia tātou. A tēnā koutou, a tēnā no tātou katoa. On the 3rd of February, the Tua Papa Kōrero for the Mana Wāhine claim began its hearings before the Waitangi Tribunal. And on the 6th of February, we gathered as a nation to acknowledge and remember te kawenata, te tiriti o Waitangi that was signed by our tupuna in 1840. 13 of those rangatira wahine. Their moko, their tohu is forever etched on the parchment, te kawenata, te tiriti o Waitangi. Today is the first hui, directly after these two significant kaupapa, where we will hear the voices of wahine, whom are all leaders in our nation. The generation reclamation is derived from our being members of the generation of this time in reclaiming and holding fast to our mana as Māori, as wahine. We have placed our hand to the work and stand to ensure the reclamation, the protection of our taonga, our reo, our tikanga, is our life's journey and commitment. Whereby in the late 60s, as a nation, our people, te iwi Māori, were at a point where we saw the decline of our reo, our whenua, our tikanga, our Māori. Between 1970 and the 1990s, strong leadership of our kuia, kaumātua, tuakana, tungāngi, stood to ensure our Māori would not be lost. We now as Māori enjoy and celebrate our tamariki mokopuna, where te reo Māori is their first language. We have our own radio stations nationwide, TV networks. We are leaders in business and social change, and these are some of the amazing opportunities we have today in our generation, the generation of reclamation. We bear witness to and we stand to protect, but we still have so much more to do. I'm humbled to be joined by a stunning panel of amazing wahine, or leaders in their respective fields. They will kōrero about their life's journey, they will tell their story and share their aspirations for the future. I introduce our first speaker, Dr. Keri, Milne-Ihimaera, an inspiring wahine, educationalist committed to protecting the future endeavours of our tamariki, mokopuna and whānau and the education journey. Tātou mā, our first speaker, Dr. Keri Milne-Ihimaera, ka tuku te rākau kia koe, tuku tuakana, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Karleen. E aku nui, e aku rahi nei rā te mihi ki a koutou katoa. A ka mihi hoki ki a koe, Karleen, mō tērā whakamoemati hei whakawātea te huarahi mō tātou i tēnei ata. Me te mihi anō hoki ki enei wahine ātāhua rawa no reira nōku te whiwhi, kia hono mai ki tēnei kaupapa, tēnā koutou. Ko Keri Milne-Ihimaera tōku ingoa, ko rua puke te motu, ko te ara a kewa te moana, ko motu pōhui te maunga, te rau aroha te marae, ngai te rua hiki hiki te hapu, ko ngai tahu te iwi. I sit before you today as a Māori woman, a mother, a grandmother. I'm an educator, a former teacher, a school principal. I'm a doctor of Māori development and advancement. I've been an executive director at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, a general manager at a charitable organisation, and now I'm working within my own education consultancy business. So today, in the context of generation reclamation, I want to bring all of those experiences together to talk about the journey our whānau has been on to reclaim our position as a strong, connected Māori whānau, with Te Reo Māori being our central focus. So my name is Keri Tanya Milne-Ihimaera. I was born in Australia and we moved to New Zealand when I was only 6 weeks old. My dad tells a story about wanting to name me Hine when I was born. Hine was probably one of the few Māori words my dad would have known 52 years ago. However, he worried that in Australia, I'd be called Hein. So he called me Keri, but attempted to retain his original aspiration in the spelling so that you might think it's a Māori name when you saw it. My son's name is Shay Ataria Milne. 35 years ago, as a 16-year-old mum, I knew about revolutionaries and how important they were to effect change for our people, and I knew I wanted a Māori name for our son, but somehow it came after his first name. This was a pattern we repeated for our next 2 daughters, Blake Kākoti, Georgia Te Hononga. By the time our youngest daughter was born 21 years ago, our position was different, and we were brave enough to give her a Māori first name, Kairangi Penny Ann Ihimaera. Our grandchildren are Atareta, Tīpare, Te Hākura, Te Rā, Hine Manuanui, and Nico, and there's no English words hiding in their names anywhere. Our education choices for our 4 children map out the changes that have occurred in Māori education since the 1980s. 30 years ago, when we and our friends who made similar choices for their children didn't care about the lack of focus on English, we felt that if our children could say one Māori word like pakipaki, we were doing our bit for the survival of the language. 7 years later, with the arrival of our daughter, our thinking had changed. We still wanted immersion Māori education, but English was important this time around. Our expectation now was that it was our children's absolute right to have excellence in both languages. By the time our 3rd child arrived in 1996, there were more options. Kura kaupapa Māori, bilingual, immersion units, so it didn't feel as much of a conscious decision. It had become for us our normal pathway. Our youngest daughter, born in the year 2000, finished her total immersion secondary education in Wharekura. My husband and I were adamant that we wanted our children to be better speakers of Te Reo Māori than we were, and these education choices were one part of that decision. My children have made similar choices, total immersion decisions for their children, who have been immersed in Te Reo Māori since birth. With their learning, we've come full circle, from a whānau whose language was first and predominantly English, to this new generation who know little English at all and who are fluent native Māori speakers with far too much sass at times. We're incredibly proud. As a whānau, we've realised that the status quo of the New Zealand mainstream education system is not going to suit my mokopuna. 96% of Māori children are enrolled in our mainstream education system, where only 6% receive education in Te Reo Māori. For many communities, there are no other education choices other than the local school up the road, who still make little effort to pronounce Māori children's names and place names correctly, that sends messages to whānau about what's really important in the school. We're proud, of course, of the development of kohanga reo, kura kaupapa Māori, wharekura, and other Māori medium education options that have given us all some choices and an alternative for us to consider. However, in the mainstream, no matter how much we Māori change our thinking, bureaucracy, the government, and the system continues to perpetuate barriers that make it very difficult to work differently. The challenge for mainstream education providers is to really interrogate their organisation and practice and understand that the historical overrepresentation of our people in negative education statistics is not a problem with us, but with the way we've historically delivered this thing called education. It's old, it's tired, it's still colonial, and for large groups of our society, it simply doesn't work. As an educator, I'm a critic of what's currently happening in education, and I challenge the system's readiness to transform to meet the needs of my mokopuna and all mokopuna Māori. So when we're talking about reclamation, we've also got to talk about the damage that's been done to us as a people, presenting the need for us to reclaim the past to build a strong future. We've made a deliberate choice as a whānau that we're no longer going to engage in the mainstream education system. We're beyond tokenistic attempts from schools to be more receptive to the needs of Māori. The damage that system has caused to generations of Māori families is no longer our choice. When your eyes are opened up to the issues of social justice and inequity, you can't simply close them again. You've got to be brave and be prepared to challenge, to question, to stand up and to fight. I've been an activist for social change. In my professional career, I've been prepared to stand up, speak out and challenge. As a Māori businesswoman, it's no different. I've got a simple checklist for myself that I use to keep me accountable and ensure that the work I engage in will actually make a difference for Māori. I've turned down work if it hasn't aligned to what I think is important. And so where to next for our whānau? Well, my husband and I are moving to Bluff in a few years' time. It's been 4 generations since someone from our whānau resided in our Ngaitahu tribal territory and our Ruahiki homelands. We've moved from Auckland when our children were young to take them home to Taitokero, where my husband is from. Our kids were raised on the whenua they were connected to, and that was an amazing part of their upbringing, and it's enabled them to be strong and confident in who they are. It's become obvious to me in more recent years that that's the next part of my reclamation journey. I understand too that I'm lucky enough to be able to have the choice to move, and so I had to ask myself, why hadn't I done that already? I'm looking forward to the next generation of Milnes who will know what it's like to feel southern wind on their faces, who know where all the cups and the wharekai at Te Rau Aroha go, and know where the aunties' houses are in Bluff, and who can all tell stories of being connected to all of their tātai whakapapa. I try to keep my eye on the island, you know, that strategic metaphor of knowing where you're heading to so that you can make navigational decisions to ensure that you arrive at the destination you intended to rather than drifting around aimlessly. I think as a whānau, we're sailing in the right direction. So thank you for your time this morning. Thank you to Global Women for the invitation. I'm looking forward to listening and learning from our other kai kōrero, and I feel honoured to be able to share space with everyone on this panel here today. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
E te tuakana tēnā koe mō tō kōrero. I roto I tō kaha tō maia ki tēnei anō ko tupu mai o Tamariki. Thank you for the amazing kōrero that you have presented to us this morning. And equally your maia, your bravery, your strength, your courage. E te tuakana tēnā koe. We now will be turning to our second speaker. He wāhine mai te waipanamu. A highly respected business woman, and she has sat at the helm of leadership for her iwi organisation, Ngaitahu. And today is a leader in the Māori economic space and also in the space of social change, hauora and climate change for the betterment of her people. E te tuakana e Arihia, ko e nei te tuku ko tukanatu te rākau ki a koe, tēnā koe.
O tuatahi o te rā, wahine mā, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. Me nau mai, haere mai. Ko Arihia, Bennett tōku ingoa, Ngāi Tahu, Ngāti Pirau, ngā pui a oku iwi, no tuahiwi a hau. Ki ngā kawai o ngā pōhio, kei te tai pautini te rāku hapu ki Arahura, ki ngā kawai tainui o te rā rohe. Engari, kei Ngāti Pirau, ki te taho o te taku pāpā. Kia ora, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity to join this prestigious panel where we today are sharing our own thoughts and our own reflections on our own generation of reclamation. And I thought it was a really fitting place just to begin, not with myself, but really what brings me to the being immersed in the kaupapa that I'm engaged in today. And I have to really give thanks to my own upbringing, a long history of strong wāhine in terms of being immersed in the whakapapa kōrero and the mahi of the Māori Women's Welfare League, and also not forgetting on my dad's side, native speaker and totally immersed in te reo Māori. Today I live in a 3-generation, actually now 4 generations, household just north of Christchurch, and we still have the beauty of being able to listen to our father, to kōrero to us around not only his upbringing, his stories, but even from his Ngāti Porou and his Ngāpuhi side, right in the belly and the heart of Ngāi Tahu. So that's something that we have, all of our family have lived with, and we'll go on doing so. So I just want to pay that acknowledgement to my own whānau. If I also think about generations of reclamation before I move to myself, and I think about this role that I am in at Ngāi Tahu, and my professional career has always been brought up in community development and as a social worker. And I see myself no different today in this role, having been in the role for just over 8 years. It is very much of a social work role, and it's much of a role around bringing and developing ongoing community development. So I see it no different in that respect. But I just want to touch on, when we think about Ngāi Tahu, we think about where we are today. And I also just want to acknowledge those 7 to 8 generations of struggle, pain, and strategic thought, articulation and negotiation to actually bring us to where we are today in terms of a flourishing iwi. A flourishing iwi that is about 70,000 strong and building, and delightful to hear Keri talking about Bluff, having been there at the weekend for Waitangi Day, where when I think about generations of reclamation, I think about every year when I go to Waitangi celebrations at either Onuku, just on the Banks Peninsula, or Tāko, or down in the Bluff, Awarua, we are seeing the change take place in terms of immersing our Ngāi Tahutanga right through our generations. And I think it's just a delight to be a part of this and looking at that spirit woven through all of our whānau. And I think about Tā Tipani O'Regan tells us that, you know, if we've got one task in our role here, it's to maintain and flourish that heritage and the identity of our people. And he talks about the importance of knowing things, and that it is a form of love, and that is our role and our duty to enable our people to have that opportunity to participate and grow in their sense of heritage and identity. And that way people will be fulfilled and they will grow a greater sense of belonging. So I really give thanks to all of those generations that have allowed me to park myself right in here today and actually to take that role as a kaitiaki and look towards not only today, but also to the future, making sure we're bringing that past with us. Because of course, that is the duty, to make sure we flourish and we build our identity in Ngāi Tahu taonga. My own story is woven through sort of quite an intricate whāriki of beautiful connectivity as a child, being totally linked into my marae, and as I said earlier, through the Māori Women's Welfare League, even if it was only to do the dishes, and even if it was only to bring the kai out. As I grew and into a woman, still participating with my aunties and our taua from the marae, being able to sit in on those Māori Women's Welfare League meetings was probably the pinnacle for me. And, you know, the most exciting part of being at a Māori Women's Welfare League meeting wasn't actually the meeting in the meeting, it was the meeting after the meeting. So that's where all the gems of development take place, because we know as women that it's not only about the task, it's actually about what's in the gaps and how we look to those gaps and how we fill those gaps to bring our whānau along. And this role that I have here today, and I think about what are the strengths of binding this whāriki of this iwi together? And it's not of one person, it is of a myriad of many people who actually make up those pathways to the whāriki. It's about developing a mindset and a set of skills that actually are focused and are entrenched in our heritage and entrenched in our identity. It's about looking to the past of practices and rituals such as mahinga kai, such as activities that we've been brought up with on the whenua, looking at our taonga species, and of course we know that that's really embedded in our settlement legislation, and taking care of those species, our whenua, even our rangatiratanga over freshwater. All of those things we know have been practices that have come from our generations before, and we have that responsibility right now to nourish, grow, protect, and actually take them into the future. So those rituals are something that we won't lose and we will take forward with us. Engaging, another part is actually engaging with our 70,000 whānau, and it's growing day by day. How do we do that in terms of being responsible and broadly going beyond our own tribal taki? We know that we have just under 50% of our Ngāi Tahu whānau living in the Ngāi Tahu takiwā. So we've actually got to think, we've got to be smart and think about how we engage beyond our takiwā, looking to the different types of communication vehicles that are open to us to actually engage with our whānau and enable them to be part of that heritage, of that identity. So a lot of our activities are actually focused on what we have to do to actually bring our people far and wide into what's happening and keep that connectivity happening. Another part is also the foundation core of actually building our health and our wealth. And tribal income, whānau income is absolutely critical, and we don't shy away from this. We know that, and each of us know in terms of our own whānau, that it's so important to look at how we build our whānau wealth, and behind that sits education and health, and that cannot be expressed more highly in this day and age where we know it's critical to have our young people in positions, especially as workforce. The nature of the workforce is changing very, very rapidly. And so it means that we actually have to position our younger people to be able to pick up those key roles, those key leadership roles in education and also in workforce opportunities. So bringing in an economic base is absolutely critical so that we can look at how we can move that through to the distribution of our whānau. We also really focused on our own commercial development in our own takiwā. And if I think about where we were at the settlement in 1997, 170 mil, where we are today, just over 1.5 billion, we've still got a long way to go. And we are in this place where we are part of a global society, but we are focused on building that economic base, because we know that if we build that economic base, that our people will continue to flourish and to be engaged, not only in the tribe, within their whānau, but also within their regions. And part of that economic base is actually regional development. And the regional development part is to enable papatapu rūnanga to actually be their own leaders in regional development, growing and developing their own tribal economy. Look, I think there are many things I can continue to talk about, but I think one of the things is that we need to continue to position our young people. We need to grow the rangatiratanga of our papatapu rūnanga, build those businesses, and the existence of Te Rūnanga o Ngāitau and my role in terms of that generation of reclamation is to act as that kaitiaki to enable others to be able to flourish. And for as long as I'm in this seat, you won't get much change from that. So I think hopefully I've been able to share a little bit of the kaupapa from where I've come from and where our iwi is heading to. Kia ora.
Kia ora. E te tuakana nei rā te mihi anō kia koe. Thank you so much for the sharing of your words and your journey there as you stand in your waka to lead your people o Ngaitahu in the journey ahead. E te tuakana tēnā koe. With that, whānau, I now have absolute honour and privilege in which to introduce our third speaker for this morning, Deputy Chief Director, Child Rights Programs at UNICEF. She is the daughter of inspiring lineage. She has sat at the tables of organisations and led those through significant change. That is to ensure the path is strengthened for Māori. I tēnei wā, it is with an honour I introduce Brandi Hudson. E te tuakana ka tuku te rākau kia koe, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, tēnā koe Karleen, mō tō awhi, mō tō karakia I tēnei ata. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tainui me te aroa uku waka, ko Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Pukea, Ngāti Rārua te iwi, ko Kakepuku tōku maunga, ko Brandi, ko Waipa tōku awa, ko Brandi Hudson tōku ingoa. Wonderful to be here this morning and just to hear, first of all, obviously the Wāhine that I'm on this panel with, Keri and Arihia and my beautiful friend Ariana, another Ngāti Maniapoto girl. Thank you, Karleen, for that. It's really interesting when I get introduced in these things because I'm like, I don't think that's me, because yesterday I was just at the farm, you know, getting rid of all of the rat poop out of the whānau unit that we've got down there so that we can clean it up for our next lot of renters. And then I had to go down to the farm and to see what my brothers had done, and they'd gone and put a really amazing run thing in for the cows. So I've come from very humble beginnings, and you know, it's a wonderful way to have lived a life. So just when I think about reclamation, when I went home yesterday to Ngāti Maniapoto, we live on the Waitangi Caves Road. I was brought up in our family homestead. So my great-grandparents lived in there. My grandmother lived at one end of the house and my great-grandfather lived at the other, and they didn't speak to each other for 25 years. They spoke to each other through their moko, my Auntie Mary. So those are quite hilarious thoughts to think in this little tiny whare. There was that lack of communication, but a strong relationship nevertheless. And then my mother decided about 40 years ago that she would put a unit on our whenua for our grandparents. And that was a huge undertaking for my whānau, because we didn't have the resources back in that time to really pay for this unit. So to this day, I don't know how it got paid. But my mother had this vision for ensuring that her parents could live in comfort on our whenua. And it's sad that both of them had actually passed away before they could, my grandmother had passed away before she could move into the unit. And then my grandfather, who wasn't from the Maniapoto, wanted to go and live elsewhere. Anyway, it's been there and it's housed a lot of our whānau. And then 13 years ago, my husband and I worked with our parents to put a brand new whare onto our whenua. And that was a major undertaking, because we had to take on the banks and we had to take on the banking ombudsman, and we could not get a loan from anyone for us to build a whare on rural, Māori-owned rural land. And we decided to take that battle on, and we won. And Bank of New Zealand apologised to us for their discriminatory policies in regards to using Māori land as security. And they, after a lot of battling, they rang down to Wellington and managed to get the brakes off the policy at the time, and we got to build a whare on our whenua. So those three things have really helped shape the way that I lead, and that is by doing. And if I can't see the actual doing, then I'm just doing a lot of talking. So I'm very, very much about what the output is. What I'm not fixated with anymore is the time frame. So for Māori, we are here forever. And so I'm just one part of the foreverness of my whānau. So when I started working as the CEO for the Independent Māori Statutory Board, I wanted them to put te reo onto trains within a year and public transport. And I realised after 3 years of working and trying to advocate into the Auckland Council that it was actually going to take a decade or a generation to get some pretty simple things that Māori have been fighting for many generations. And when I took my mind off the time frame and knew that the kaupapa that I was advocating for was the most important thing, then that helped me to rest easy with my very, very I think people used to call it aggressive advocacy, but I remember the day that myself and a board member got on the train from Britomart to Onehunga to hear the te reo on that route. We cried, we had tears coming down our eyes, because 8 years prior to that we'd been laughed out of the room of Auckland Transport, and they thought that our advocacy for $2 million a year to put te reo into all the public transport was just a joke. So to hear the te reo now has been an amazing achievement in my mind that has come from many generations of advocacy for our beautiful reo to be shared with all people in Aotearoa. I've just worked with UNICEF Aotearoa to put the Aotearoa into their name. They have realised that in order to at least acknowledge partnership with Māori and Aotearoa, that they need to be thinking about what their brand is. And we've been working with our Māori brand experts to bring forward our Māori design into all of UNICEF's mahi. And what we did was our Māori experts, they went and got the UNICEF Global Brand Guidelines. These are the ones that are in Geneva. And they pulled through the secondary colour palette of the brand guidelines. And they said, wow, these colours are all the Māori colours. And so now we are working with designers to use that secondary colour palette and put it into all of our social media with high integrity and in a very informed way, so that our UNICEF Aotearoa all around the globe is differentiated because of our te ao Māori, because of our commitment to Aotearoa, and to our commitment to partnership. And we think that this will be a great way for many other Indigenous whānau that are with UNICEF to see what they can do in their own whenua, with their own tangata whenua, to also consider what it means for them to use their Indigenous design, which is our story and our whakapapa, to thread those into these mainstream organisations. I've thought about today framing the rest of my kōrero around aroha. And for me, the A for aroha is our ātāhua tūpuna. And I want to acknowledge my tūpuna, my great-grandmother, Mererore, who was in the top of the South Island. She was from Motueka. And in the early 1900s, I know that she advocated for our whānau to have water in the summer and to have drainage in the winter. And we have many records of her advocating for our whānau to the council and to the government people of that time, to make sure that our people in Motueka were not living in these dire conditions because of the way that the colonisers had taken over our whenua, and we were left in very, very difficult times. So I think she'd be really proud to know, Mererore, that as part of Wakatu, we've now gone on to be the biggest ratepayer in Nelson. We've gone on to be one of the biggest employers in Nelson, and that we are working every day to ensure that our tamariki have great opportunities to go home in wānanga. And as much as it pained me to have to shout at my daughter to get on the aeroplane to go back for the wānanga and Wakatu, and her telling me that she wanted to go on holiday and how dare I send her down to the South Island in her holidays, only to know that she went to Te Tauihu and had the most amazing time with her other whanaunga as a 15-year-old Wāhine, and then to know that my father went down to see the graduation of these Wāhine after 7 days, to watch his granddaughter, his mokopuna, doing the kaikaranga. And these things, they bring a lot of emotion, that we can move from having nothing and living in dire straits to our children enjoying the fruits of our land. So we are looking forward to building a beautiful whare on our whenua in Te Manipoto. We've just bowled down the trees so we can see the cowshed, and that'll be our and what we dedicate to our grandparents who lived in a tent in the river down in the 1930s. We'll be living in a little resort, enjoying all of our whānau this Christmas, we hope. So that's a little bit of my story. I wish I could talk for some more, Karleen, but thank you everyone for the opportunity to kōrero with you today. Kia ora.
Kia ora, e te tuakana. Ka takamei. As we've all witnessed in Brandi's kōrero, the pure emotion and commitment from humble beginnings, but to create change for our whānau and future generations, where her father could hear the karanga of his mokopuna. E te tuakana e Brandi, tēnā koe. Me te komihi ki tō whaia tūpuna a Mererore, mō tōna maia, mō tōna kaha, tēnā koe. Kia ora everybody. We now will be turning to our fourth speaker for this morning on this taumata wahine kōrero. And it is an honour. And I say that because our next speaker, Ariana, her strength and courage, what she has been able to achieve as a leader of education, korikori tinana, of business, and is now the general manager at Amo Time. She's been instrumental in leading our people for our reo, tikanga and kaipapa. She wears very proudly te moho kauwai. With it, ka tuku te rākau kia koe te tuakana e Ariana, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, e te tuakana, ngā mihi aroha ki a koe Karleen, mō tō tautoko i te ahiahi nei, o te ata nei, me te ngā mārei kura i te noho i tēnei hui, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko waiau, ki te taho tōku māma, ko Ngāpuhi te iwi, ki te taho tōku pāpa, ko Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Tūwhare tō Wōku iwi. Ko Ariana Pōlahau, ko au te māma o te aria me te aurua me Aorangi, ko Tamapōtaka hoa rangatira. It's wonderful to be here this morning, and you know, nerves because I'm the last speaker after all of these incredible women. I think the only reason why I can say I'm the last one is because I was hoping they'd all take up the time and I wouldn't have anything else to say. And as I'm listening to the kōrero, I think I just want to be able to focus on one thing. And the one thing that I really do want to try and tie us all in is around how mana full wahine are. And I wear these today in not only because they're beautiful to wear, but because I've been listening to the mana wahine claims and the opening that happened a few days ago just before Waitangi, and I'm listening to the beautiful kōrero, the history and what we have come through as Wāhine Māori and the giants and our tūpuna who have laid the pathway for us to be here today. And so that word that captures me today is mana full. And I want to share where that word for me came first arrived. It was when I had just finished doing a kōrero with our Maniapoto whānau Brandi. And it was about resetting the strategy. And there was one of our beautiful wahine who was about to leave the kōrero. She said, before I go, I just want to remind us all who are here in this zui, because we're all in a zui, how mana full we all are. And that really stuck with me. I was like, oh, you know, it was one of those reminders that we always kind of trying to look for it, but we forget to look for it within. We're looking on the outside to validate what's here, what's already in the inside. And so I just thought, by listening to the kōrero, by hearing the mana wahine kōrero that has been going on, by listening to Waitangi, what has been the speeches that have been said, I want us to remember that we have to look within for our own. And as all of the speakers here this morning have brought that kōrero and what we have been doing to assist our whānau, to assist our communities, to assist our iwi, to move from states, to remember how mana full we are. We come through a history of long-standing leaders, of chiefs and chieftainesses, and we have to remember that wherever we go. When I stood on Rangiriri a few years ago, the powerful connection that I felt to that whenua, when I was reminded of the heartbreaking events that took place there. How could I not, with all of the resources that I have with me, not carry that forward? The legacy that our tūpuna have fought for, how could I not? And so the questions that I was asking myself one day as I stood on the whenua of Rangiriri, where the wars had broken out, where our people were falling, but where our women and our men stood together because they fought for us. So today, I stand to help continue that fight. One of my fights, my own protests around us being stripped of our mana came to me through a dream. And I'll talk about my dream, but for years, Tama and I had been looking at ways that we could mobilize whānau into different spaces. So we wanted to know how we as two people, as a whānau, could support Māori to move from state to state, to remember how mana full they were. So we took it upon ourselves to do a few things. Mahi aroha is what we called it, but we started things like Try Māori. We started things like Squiggle. We started things that would help to reimagine the states that we were in so that our whānau could have dreams and aspirations ahead of them, that they would remember how manaful they were. So I'd been on this journey for some time, but prior to that journey, I actually feel like I was in wahi kore or ngaro, or a state where I had forgotten. And why I say that is because whilst I was brought up with grandparents who were both fluent in te reo, who had moved from their homes to give us, the future generations, a better lifestyle, we had almost cut ourselves off from knowing who we were as Māori. So it wasn't until very late in my sort of teenage years that I actually discovered that there was a difference between Māori and Pākehā, that actually I had a culture, I had a language that I hadn't really been connected into. So my curiosity around that was really some sort of, I felt very lost during that time. And that lost, I guess, feeling came more and more clear as I was re-engaging with Te Ao Māori. And the more I became immersed in Te Ao Māori, the more I thought and reflected on, why was it that it was so different? Why was I brought up in a place where Te Ao Māori was not part of who I was as a woman, as a girl growing up? I would be asked all the time, where are you from? You know, not only in overseas in different countries, but I'd be asked here, who are you? And I'd think to myself, can you not just see who I am by looking at me? I'd have to explain, oh, I'm Māori. Oh, are you? The surprised looks I would get when answering with, you know, where my whakapapa, how I connect, where I'm from. But that became sort of part of a healing process for me to understand and become more clearer around who I was becoming, and the responsibilities that I have as Wāhine Māori to carry that through and to never lose that ever again. So a few months ago, it became very clear to me, and I received a message. I received a message, and it was from my kuia. It was from my nanny, and it was very clear. And I remember waking up the very next morning after I'd heard her voice. And I said to husband, it's time for me to get my moko kawai. And thinking that he would pull me out of this, you know, the process that I had been working myself through, and ask me all these questions around why, when, who, the response that I received was more of a surprise. It was, I thought you would. And so I knew that was my time. That was my time. I thought I would wait till I was 60 years old, till I was 70 years old before I would receive moko kawai. But when I heard my nanny's voice, when it came to me in my dream that now was the time, I knew I could not ignore that. So I set about and on my pathway, and I talked to my whānau about this. And again, my whānau, all of the wahine in my whānau just knew it was time that this would happen. And so today I wear moko kawai as my reclamation of being a wahine, being Māori, and no longer will I be ever asked in my own country, where are you from? And so that is one of the greatest joys when sitting in a restaurant with some friends, being asked by, you know, having a kōrero with the wonderful man who was serving our table. He asked everyone on our table, where are you from? Where are you from? But when he looked at me, he said, I know where you're from. That to me, I thought, never again will I have to explain who I am, where I'm from. And that is one of the gifts I feel of wearing moko kawai, is that people will not only know what's here inside me, but they will see the expression and how I wear this outwardly as well. So my kōrero about wearing moko kawai really did come from my nanny, and you know, there's no way that I would deny that. So I just wanted to wrap that up and just remind us here, those who are listening in on the kōrero, you don't need to look outside to know that you're manafu here. So neira te mihi kia koutou katoa.
E te tuakana taku mihi. Korongo atu ki tērā no tō reo e rere mai i tōku ia. Hei reira anō rātou i tō taha. E te tuakana, thank you. Thank you for the absolute honour and privilege we have to hear your story, to hear your kōrero, but to also hear the voice of your nanny. With that, e te tuakana, tēnā koe. Kia koutou o kutuakana, te taumata kōrero wahine nei. To you, the panelists, thank you for sharing your kōrero. We've had a question that has come through Q&A, and Brandi, te tuakana, thank you for responding to that. Karen, I hope that that is in response to your question, and we're happy to kōrero more about that at a moment when we may share time again with you. I have a question for our panel, and that is, and this will be an open kōrero, what is your greatest lesson in your journey? Your greatest lesson in your journey. E te tuakana, Keri, I'll start with you first, and then I'll hand over to Arihia for your brief response to that.
My greatest lesson, gosh, I've had many of them. You know, things don't always go to plan, and and I think that's important, that you take the hard times with the good times. And somebody told me about, you know, the analogy of it's easy to navigate the waka through calm seas, but the test is when you can actually get that waka through some really choppy times. So I think that's been a really, I don't know if it's my greatest lesson, but it's the one that I'm thinking of right at the moment, about the downtime. You know, the hard times are just as important as the positive times. And there's always learning and lessons and reflection opportunities in there. So yeah, I'm not sure why that came up, but that's kind of where I'm at. That's what I think. The hard times are just as important as the good times. Focus on the positive, but don't kind of shy away from the negatives.
Arihia, what is your response to that question? Thank you. Your greatest lesson.
There's a couple of things for me. My greatest lesson has always been think before you speak. And the other part to go with that, whatever does come out of the waha, is actually about always reflecting, standing in somebody else's shoes. Always be thinking about, it's about service, and it's about thinking about where, what's happening for somebody else and standing in their shoes, even if it's for a moment in time. And putting that together with thinking before you speak, hopefully something does roll out that is sensible. Kia ora.
Kia ora. E te tukana, Brandi, your response.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate my not being attached to a time frame for change, but being really positive and tenacious about the kaupapa that you're seeking to advocate for, and to be optimistic. I'm just forever optimistic that no matter how hard my ancestors, my tupuna had struggles in their life, that they also had optimism for us, because they kept on focusing on their moko puna, the puna they saw, the reflection of their moko in the way that they did things. So just to be optimistic about the future for Aotearoa, and to thank all of those non-Māori. Those are the ones that I guess have been a big learning, that have also been the advocates for equality, for the treaty principles to be real and to be considered positively by both parts of the of Aotearoa. So those are my lessons. Thank you.
E te tōkane Ariana, ia katoa whakatū. Your response.
One of the challenges, I think, is just ensuring that our history is not forgotten and it's not whitewashed in a way that makes the next generation feel that all the work has been done. So it's just making sure that the transference of that happens in a way that they feel it and they know it and they live it and breathe it. Kia ora.
We, of course, all appreciate here on Te Taumata Kōrero the history, the battle, the lines in which our kuia, of course, Dame Whina is on my shoulder, of which many of those kuia, our kaumātua, our tupuna, fought. Their aspirations for the future. We last year, as a country, as a nation, as a world, have experienced the epidemic, and what that has meant for us is how we live today, and equally what our aspirations are for the future. Can I ask of the panel, what is your message to global women, to the global women members, that you would like to leave with them as we together build our nation in a post-COVID environment? E te tuakana, e Keri, ke iakwe.
Tēnā koe, Karleen. I suppose the final message in listening to everybody talking today, there's definitely some areas of synergy and commonality. So I think for me, it's that idea of being future focused and taking control of your destiny. For me, as a whānau, I'm a great believer in things happen at grassroots, ground level, and not to wait for those in supposedly higher positions of power to organise your destiny for you. So take control of your future plan, make a plan and take a step, take that first step, take that second step and work your way slowly but surely into the destiny that's your right to enjoy, and to be really intentional about you being in the driver's seat of that future that you want to design for you and your whānau. So yeah, I runga I rā kōrero, nei rā te mihi kia koutou, o tira kia tātou.
Kia ora. E te tuakane Arihia. Kia hana tō kōrero.
O kia ora anō. I think what stands out for me most, and it's always something that I've brought with me right through my own development, and it will be going into the future, is actually about well-being. Oranga well-being begins at home. The role that each of us play at home in terms of taking care, fostering, growing, and teasing the thinking of those around us, our young people at home. First of all, look inwards at home and always have a degree of happiness and well-being around what's going on in our homes first and foremost. Because if we haven't got that, then we can't pitch outwards, and we can't breathe that sense of building community well-being development beyond if we haven't got a happening thing going on in our own homes.
Kia ora. E te tuakana e Brandi. Your final message in closing.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to encourage global women to be really committed and conscientious about correct pronunciation of te reo. I would really encourage you to do everything you can via YouTube, social media. There's so many resources out there, so that your friends, your whānau, your colleagues can hear your commitment to us as a bicultural country, and that you're our children that we've all given these beautiful names can hear their names being respected and pronounced correctly, so that it helps with their self-esteem and confidence, because they are our future leaders. Kia ora.
Kia ora. E te tōkana e Ariana, ki ia koe no te whakamutunga I tō kōrero.
Tēnā koe. The one thing that I would like to convey is around the importance of staying authentically you. I think often when we're in different settings, we tend to leave parts of us behind and bring another masculine side with us. But I would really encourage you to hold fast to your wāhine-ness, to your feminist, and to bring that with all of those other soft skills, such as empathy, love, kindness, caring, nurturing. Bring that all with you, and don't feel like you have to leave it at the door just because you're walking into a forum that requires you to, you know, to fit in with the surroundings. I think as we've seen over the COVID and the COVID response, our own leader, Jacinda Ardern, that is how she has approached us to take us through. But also, if you look to the iwi leaders and those who were such as Arihia, who were leading iwi through the pandemic for Māori. Actually, it was Wāhine Māori that were taking charge. And I feel that is why, one of the reasons why Māori have responded so well. We're not through the pandemic, we're not over it, but that is one of my challenges. I would love to just, you know, to say to you, don't feel like you have to fit into someone else's world. You take everything in with you and you take it proudly. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou. Greetings again. Thank you so very much. Te wahine taumata kōrero. Thank you so very much for being here today. Thank you also to our global women who joined this webinar from across Aotearoa and across the world. Thank you for joining us to the Generation Reclamation, reclaiming the past to build a strong future for Māori and all of Aotearoa, proudly hosted by global women. Koe nei te mihi kia koutou, a tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.